On Friday, I sat in a Hillsborough County courtroom as convicted serial killer Bobby Joe Long's attorneys and expert witnesses argued that the state's death penalty protocol would cause him undue suffering because he has epilepsy and a brain injury, and one of the drugs Florida uses could induce seizures. The state's expert witnesses disagreed. We heard from one person who's already endured undue suffering, the mother of one of his victims.
He inflicted pain on my daughter and the other victims. And he's worried about pain, what he's gonna feel. No, that's not right.
Last month, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis called the death penalty, quote, appropriate punishment and not something he takes glee in supporting, end quote. The governor's right. Nothing about this issue should include the word glee, but it's easy to understand what he means. There are horrible people in this world that don't deserve to live among us, whether they're put in prison or to death. Bobby Joe Long is accused of raping and murdering at least 8 women in the Tampa Bay area. In one case, leaving a woman tied and tortured in the woods with her throat slit. But there's more to consider here than just the crimes. Florida's Department of Corrections says 97 inmates have been executed in Florida since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. And there are 343 inmates still sitting on death row in our state right now. The cost of sentencing someone to death row and executing them is far higher than a life sentence in prison due to long appeals and court battles. The Florida Public Defender Association estimates our state spends $51 million more every year to impose the death penalty versus life in prison. In recent studies, Kansas and Oklahoma found the cost is between 3 to 4 times higher. And those are just the financial costs. The human cost may be even greater. Guess who leads the nation in death row inmates who have been exonerated because they were innocent? That's right, it's Florida. The Death Penalty Information Center shows 28 inmates in Florida have been exonerated in the last 50 years. That's 33% more than any other state. 165 inmates across the U.S. have been let free since 1973. 165, think about that. How many of them could have been killed despite being innocent? I found several studies with mixed results on whether the death penalty actually deters criminals from committing heinous crimes. But we do know that it's applied unequally. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, in cases involving interracial murders, 290 black defendants have been executed when their victim was white versus 20 white defendants executed when their victim was black. A 2014 study at the University of Washington found its state's jurors were 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a black defendant than a white defendant in a similar case. Similar studies in California and North Carolina found that a defendant of any race was 3 to 4 times more likely to get the death penalty when the victim was white versus black or Latino. Look, long story short, I understand why people support the death penalty, especially victims' families, and I understand why others oppose it. I am not taking a position on it here. You'll never catch me standing for the worst people in our society who commit the most horrific crimes. Bobby Joe Long has had to live with what he's done, maybe for only a few more weeks. But given the cost, the trauma to families, and the fact that given the sheer numbers, it's likely a state government in these United States has killed an innocent person, we have to ask ourselves as a society if that's something we can live with.